So the original inspiration for the Sal and Gabi books, as you can imagine, are myriad. Like everything that's going to be the length of a novel is going to have multiple sources. I had written stories for grown-ups that had a Sal Villon character as an adult, as a physicist, and I had a Gabi Real character as an adult. As an adult, Gabi becomes a journalist for the weird and the cryptozoological and things like that. So both of those characters existed as adults in my head, and I loved them. They were my two favorite characters that I'd ever written. So the original inspiration was sort of like, what if I took those two characters and put them in the same middle school when they're basically middle school aged. I was reading about diabetes, and I learned that the Latinx community has the highest rate of growth for type 2 and type 1 diabetes, and nobody's exactly sure why. I think part of the reason may be because of reporting, that people are only now learning in the Latinx community to report on these sorts of things and get certain kinds of medical care. But the underreporting may have contributed to that. Whatever the cause or reason, to me it was a real alarm bell. It also reminded me, though, of, a class that I had taken in graduate school with Leonard Davis, who specializes in disability studies, and how important it is to make some corrections to the way that we've portrayed people who have things that we consider traditional disabilities, like chronic conditions like diabetes. So it was a real inspiration for me to make sure that people with diabetes were portrayed heroically, because people with diabetes are heroes and they need to have those representations as well. One of the other inspirations that I had, of course, was my Cuban background and culture. We've had many amazing portrayals of the immigrant experience in the canon of Latinx literature. It is often a genre that focuses on all of the hardships and the difficulties of assimilation. Yes, that is 100% something that needs to be portrayed and written about over and over. But what I was missing a lot of times was the joy. My childhood was full of hardship and difficulty in terms of, being first generation Cuban and writing between two cultures. But it was also just full of laughter and exuberance. When I graduated high school, I graduated as the outstanding writer in English, and that was one of the things that made my father the proudest, because he was told, by doctors, he was a cardiological technician, he was told by a doctor that he shouldn't teach his kids Spanish because it was going to interfere with their ability to assimilate and to learn English and function in society. That wasn't really an option. My mother really only spoke Spanish, and so we needed to be able to be bilingual. So, when he was told this, it stuck with him. And then, 15 years later, here I was winning this award, and he was like, "Ha! Ha, doctor!" That I was able to basically do that. And so, one of the things that it's important to me to capture is this idea of an immigrant experience is complex, and part of the whole package is all the joy that you get to experience from your various cultures as they interact with each other. That hybridity can be a beautiful thing, even with all of its difficulties as well. In the school of writing, there are two basic camps. Sometimes they're called the planners versus the pantsers. Sometimes the planners versus the gardeners. They're metaphors of tending gardens and stuff. But the basic camps basically are like, do you make an outline in the beginning and then follow the outline? Do you make an outline at the beginning and change things around as you go and suddenly your outline becomes irrelevant? Or do you not make an outline? And do you just let words and inspiration explode on the page? For me, I'm much more like the third category there, where I try to discover as I write and use the writing as the discovery process. Terry Pratchett said that the first draft is for the writer, telling the story to themselves, and the second draft is for the reader. I love that particular metaphor, because to me, I need to surprise myself when I'm writing, and I need to make myself laugh, and I need to make myself wonder, and I need to push myself violently away from the desk and be like, oh my God, did I just say that? Like, I need to be able to do those things so that I can make sure that the words are living on the page. However, after first drafts, I outline. My wife does this too. We did this together at one point when we were actually in draft 3 or 4 of our different books. We first write inspiration and just try to wend our way through the narrative by creating on the fly, but then we plan. I spent a lot of time just trying to play and create things that don't follow usual patterns. But after, I very intentionally went back and went through all the different elements in there, made sure that characters were consistent and that I didn't leave too many plot holes. I hope. Plot holes are a nightmare and a whole different discussion, but really going through and trying to make sure that the narrative was unified and cohesive, that characters were consistent, and that the story's pacing was at the right level. And so I tend to like a fairly frantic pace, as you can tell by Break the Universe. That feeling of uncertainty of where it's going, but things that are moving quickly at the same time, that's my jam. So when it comes to the multiverse to me is like one of the premier metaphors of our time for what experience is. Once upon a time there was no internet, so there was no worrying about what your Insta was doing, or what profile picture you were going to pick for your next social media or whatever. We are much more virtual now, and that means there are a lot more facets of us, and we portray ourselves in different ways through a different medium. And this happens, of course, in person as well. If you're talking to your parents, you're probably talking a little differently than when you talk to your friends when you're all by yourselves. Or, when you are at work or at school or all of these different places. And so the multiverse is a premier metaphor for that fractured identity that I think is so much a part of what we have to manage as people today, who we are as people today. Was the portrayals of schools and teachers as terrible places and terrible people, like these mean, I'm gonna mark you down, quibbling and often missing for the forest for the trees. That's not my experience with teachers. The teachers I know now are great people who, for very little money, do a tremendous amount of work for our kids. Yeah, like a lot of teachers get such a bad rap when really we should be extolling them for the heroes that they are. So that's one of the things I do in Sal and Gabi Break and Fix. I love these teachers, and I wanted to write people who are intellectually curious and excited about bringing children into the world of ideas. Another thing that I wanted to rail against was parents being terrible or absent parents. And so, if you say the word stepmother, did you think evil? Did you think right there? Evil stepmother, right? This is the problem with that fairy tale that has cursed us all. It has instilled in us an idea of what stepmothers are. And again, my experience with found family and family that's gathered together, very different from what's in the book. So American Stepmom is absolutely one of my favorite characters, right at the top, and I wrote her with a great deal of love and intelligence and affection because that is the person that I wanted people to imagine alongside all the other sorts of stepmothers that we've seen. We've had enough of the evil stepmother. What we haven't seen enough are all of these people who work so hard to start new families together and bring all of this love, and because it can be such a difficult situation to enter into a family in progress rather than starting one from the ground up, that we need to be celebrating and showing just all the love and sacrifice that goes into that kind of relationship. Gabi has a big bunch of dads. I love the idea of these families that just allow for a lot of dads. And I mean, a lot of people have been asking questions about the Gabi dads in terms of like, what's the relationship really? But see, that's the scandally kind of like gossipy part that I am completely uninterested in. And in book 1, you get your answer. Sal says, you know what? They didn't feel like telling me. I know bigamy is illegal, so it's not that. Whatever they want to call their family is fine with me. That's the message. And that's the message that you should take with you too. That, you know, these people have gathered together out of love, and through that love they have joined and become a family. That's what I want for our whole world. I want us all to make bigger, larger, more imbricated families, so that we can just all get away from this idea of like, you have your tiny little nuclear family and then everybody else in this whole world. Let's make big interwoven societies that are just these vast rhizomatic families, you know, where we spread across, you know, vast swaths of territory. And let's make families bigger. I don't get to win lotto anymore. Like, I'm not going to win Super Bowl because I've used up all my luck. All my luck went into getting published by Rick Riordan Presents. I got so lucky, and I'm so happy about it. Basically the way it happened is that I had published a book for grown-ups called The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria. It was a small book. It was a collection of short stories. You know, and it did reasonably well for an independent book or whatever. It got good reviews and whatever, but like, there was no reason that Rick Riordan needed to read that book. But somehow, the book got into his hands, and he loved it. So he gave it to his editor, Stephanie Lurie, who, I'll just say, is the best editor in the universe. She's literally the best. She's such an incredible... It's been such a pleasure to work with her. Stephanie then read it, and she and Rick talked, and she asked me if I wanted a Cobb salad in New York. And so she took me out for a Cobb salad, and we talked about the possibility of writing a book. There's like this 1 in a billion chance that Rick Riordan would pick up the book, that he would like it, that Stephanie would also like it, that they, you know, then decided to offer me something. And then, of course, I had to actually do the work. So I wrote about 20,000 words of an early draft of Sal and Gabi Break the Universe. I gave a 2-page synopsis. I handed this to Stephanie, and she had to take it all through the many, many levels of Disney Hyperion to see if it would be published. You know, that means like an editorial meeting, a marketing meeting. I don't even know, like maybe she talked to Mickey, and Mickey was like, okay, I don't know. But like something happened that it all worked out, and I got very lucky, and I'm very grateful. And yeah. All right, thank you so much. I mean, I'll just blab in front of a camera like forever. So like, you know, I think it's probably time to cut this short right now. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for reading, and yeah, let's just all promise to read more books.